Hi, welcome to my review of Flight Simulator 2024. I think this is something that is overdue. I have about 300 hours on the game now, and I think that gives a pretty good experience with the game itself. My problem is that this game is so extensive that it kind of makes sense for us to break this up into a couple of parts. So there will probably be more to follow. And we'll kind of start with the simplest one because it is Flight Simulator. What is flying like, right? And what better way than to just kind of show people? Now, when you go into free flight, it is what it says on the tin. It's free flight. You get to do whatever you want to do, fly whatever plane you want to fly from whatever destination you pick. And so you do have a couple of options. I think the biggest one we can go through first is what airplane you pick. Now, there is a fairly extensive marketplace. I will probably have to go through that separately at some point. You have a couple of interesting pieces here that personally I don't care for that much. Lighter than air can be fun, but it's a little bit limited and is really kind of like sightseeing. Gliders are the same. I mean, gliders have a limited range. So then you have helicopters. I love flying helicopters. It's a lot of fun. And airplanes. There are a lot of airplanes to choose from. Small airplanes like the Aero Elvira Optica, up to all these big airliners. You can fly a Beluga, you can get yourself a 747, there's jet planes, there's really tiny airplanes like the Hawk Aero 2. And besides all of those, there are also airplanes that you can download. Now, in one of my previous videos, I used the C-160R. This is not in the base game. This is an add-on, and as you can see, you also get to pick, what skin you want for it. But in this case, I think the easiest way to get going is to just pick a simple small aircraft. So this one is a fairly simple one. Now, this one comes in two variations. Some airplanes will have variants, which, for example, the larger airplanes, you will have a passenger and a cargo variant, sometimes like a luxury liner. This one simply has two: scientific research and passengers. You do get to pick, what skin you want on it. In this case, let's just make it really blue. You get to manage your fuel and payload. Now, if you like to play realistically, I think managing your fuel is important. I don't, so that's okay. I'm going to leave that for what it is. You do get to manage your seat, ballast, fuel. In my case, so normally on these planes, it will fill the seats up to a certain percentage. What that means on the smaller planes is that it will basically put a person next to you. I think you get the best views without them. So I set the quick fill to 0, hit load aircraft, and it should reduce it to 0 out of 3 seats. You get to set your own identification numbers if you want. You can add heavy to your call sign, put whatever you like there. You can probably guess what mine is. So now that we've picked our simple little airplane, you can see by the tick box, this thing is slow. It only goes up to 14,000 feet, has a short range, but that's okay, because the point of us is to just kind of go through the steps, right? Flight conditions is a really important part of the game. Now, you can set your weather and time to live. I personally like that a lot. It does mean that depending on what time zone you live in, you sometimes won't be able to fly, for example, during the daytime in Asia, because if you're in the US, those time zones don't line up unless you start playing at 3 a.m. So you can use presets. Presets include, whatever time you pick, but also whatever date you pick, and whatever weather was live at that time. You can pick clear skies, a few clouds, scattered clouds, broken clouds, high level clouds, overcast, rain, snow, and light thunderstorms. That's a lot to go through. You can also set some of these custom. In my case, we're just going to go with live. What is annoying is you just saw this tick box go back to off. You have to turn it back on. Air traffic, I tend to keep it on live. You can turn it off entirely if you don't want anyone around you. You can have AI. It's fine. This is just the air traffic that exists at that time. If we're talking about other players, well, that's the multiplayer section. I just turn it on. Live players are visible on your map as green airplanes as opposed to white airplanes. You'll see them from time to time. If you visit very busy hubs, you will run into other players. So, now that we've set all of this, you can kind of roll around the globe and you can see where it's daylight right now and where it's nighttime right now. So, this is kind of one of those limitations I'm talking about. If you're someone who likes to fly in the daytime, or you're just getting comfortable with things, you don't want to jump right into night flying, half of the planet is locked off to you at this time. So that's where setting just a custom time comes in real handy. Now, if we want to keep it simple, we can fly around Tokyo and maybe see if we can pass by Mount Fuji. Generally speaking, if you zoom in on the map, you will get access to more airports. It starts at the highest level with the region's biggest airports, and from there on out it gets smaller. What it also does is pretty interesting. The further you zoom in, it will show you points of interest, which can be a lot of fun if you're trying to do some sightseeing and see some places that you haven't seen before. Now, I know Mount Fuji is give or take over here, so we're just going to set this as our arrival. Now what you'll see is I've set my departure, my arrival. I can pick my runways, which for this plane truly does not matter, because it can take off and land pretty much anywhere. But what you see at the top is it estimates a flight time, a distance, 54 nautical miles, and a fuel usage of 8.6 gallons. What you'll also see is information about both airports, wind speed, all of that good stuff. And you'll see this blue line. Now this blue line normally just fills in basically a direct route from your departure to your arrival. However, when you hit tab, it opens the EFB. And here you can look at your actual route. So FL is flight level. You can set this to feet as well if you like, if that's more comfortable for you. In this case, we're going to set it to 120, which is well within range. By default, that will set itself to the highest flight level that that plane can perform at. Now we have our departure, we have our departure procedure, we have our en route, our arrival procedure, and our approach procedure, and then the destination airport. What we're going to do here is you can pick a few. By default, mine goes to Jet Airways. I'm not sure if that's for everyone, but mine does. I click on Find Route, and what it does is it will add in all of these waypoints to get me to my location. I hit send to ATC and avionics. If you're someone that likes to play with air traffic control and tries to play realistic, that means that if air traffic control enforces your flight plan, they will do so appropriately based on this flight plan and not whatever might be loaded into the GPS. So from there we can go back. Now that we've set it, you'll see the map changes. It's pretty interesting how it kind of maps it out. And from here on out, we're just going to hit start. Now, it's going to take a minute for us to load in, but we're going to have to be patient. So, there we go. As it's loading in, I should kind of touch on the fact that this is a live game. Everything is streamed. It's not necessarily taking up space on my hard drive. The upside to that is that content can be up to date. The downside to that is that you need a really good connection for this to work well. I have a gigabyte line, but that said, it doesn't always run smooth and it doesn't always load in quickly. So as we've loaded in, you can see here we are. We're in Tokyo. Until I hit ready to fly, the plane is kind of going to go through the ATC procedure and roll itself onto the tarmac. You can start at the gate, meaning you can start with your engines off and having to do the entire startup procedure. I usually skip that, but sometimes it's really fun to do that. You can also walk around. So we're going to hit ready to fly. Now this is a busy airport, so there might be an airplane that comes through, which is okay. There's not really any collision with that. As I said, you can walk around. This is my airplane. We just picked this out. This is the skin that we wanted on it. You see these little blue dots? If you hover over them with your mouse, it will tell you what the item is and what you can do with it to manipulate it. You can see the rest of the airport traffic. Now all those dots you see in the distance are points of interest. Generally I turn those off because they just kind of look goofy on your screen. So there's some more planes. I'm sure in real life you wouldn't be walking around the runway, but today we are. So we're going to get back in the plane. Now the Aero Elvira Optica is a super simple plane. A child could fly it. Don't let a child fly it, but a child could fly it. You have very limited controls. They're very easy to understand. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the cockpit, you can pretty much hover over anything and see what the buttons do. That can be kind of helpful for people. In this case, you can also zoom in and out, which makes it even easier to read what it says. Even if you turn these tooltips off, you can still read what the button says. For example, pilot heat. Let's go ahead and turn it off. These are all the light functions. We have navigation, strobe, landing lights, taxi lights. I'm fairly sure these should be off. Next to it, we have radio controls. We have our GPS interface. We have our radio, and we have our autopilot panel. Bigger planes will have a lot more buttons and a lot more things to manage. This thing kind of manages itself. So remember how we looked at the EFB earlier to set the route? You can see here, you can open this during your flight. You can see it, you can use it. It's pretty great. So now that we're here, if you hit backspace, you can look around your plane. Since we're on the runway, the engine's on. All we have to do is release the parking brake. And we're just going to increase the throttle, and we're going to go ahead and take off. Now, if you see the speed dial over there, it has a green line, goes into yellow, goes into red, and then there's a white line. The white line above the green indicates at what speed you can use your flaps. And in this case, we've taken off. There's no gear to retract because this is a fixed gear. And we are going to go ahead and, while we're just casually flying around, go to this panel. You see how it has a 0 there? Let's set it to 2,000 for now. That's going to be our altitude. And we're going to go ahead and engage the autopilot for a while. And in this case, I think it's a little bit easier because it allows me to also talk and pay attention to other things. You can fly manual, you can fly on autopilot, you can fly on a combination of the two. You can do whatever you feel like. That's kind of the power of Flight Simulator. But in this case, it helps because the plane is handling itself kind of poorly, but that's okay. We can kind of look at the environment around us, right? The details on the airport are fantastic. You can see the little train lines going in and out of the airport. You can see traffic parked on the tarmac. It is pretty. If we look at the world below us, sometimes it's pretty, sometimes it's not. If you look at, for example, hopefully you can see my mouse where I'm hovering over the dock, you can see that that is a flat piece of graphic. That is just there splashed onto a flat ground. It has no depth. This building, however, has depth. Some of these buildings will have, actual buildings. Like this one, you can clearly tell this is an actual building. The ground around it has no relief. It is just flat. It's a flat surface. Things like elevated roads will be elevated. One of the items I've noticed, you don't see it from the sky very well, but if you look at this bridge in the background, you can see that the road is elevated, but the graphics of the road are also going into the water right below it. It does that for pretty much every bridge. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. The higher you get, the less that, is noticeable, but if you're flying helicopters, especially low altitude, it is noticeable, it is ugly. So in this case, we're only at 2,000 feet, and we are stable at 2,000. So if you zoom in here, this panel, as I pointed out before, controls my autopilot. We're going to go ahead and set this to, let's start with 12,000. And I set it, but it's on an altitude hold, so I'm going to hit my flight level change, and as you can tell, it's going to do its best to flight level change. I did notice we left our landing lights on, probably shouldn't, and we're going to go ahead and let it do its best to get some altitude. We can try to help it along a little bit by gently pulling back on the stick. And it will slowly gain some altitude. While it does that, we can also kind of look at the world around us. I am fairly sure that that in the distance is Mount Fuji, so we might want to disconnect our autopilot. And what heading would that be? We are here, the mountain is there, give or take there, and it'll tell us in the bottom right, 60 nautical miles, 276. So we can set a heading and we can go ahead and disconnect the autopilot and kind of go in that direction. We'll probably disconnect the whole thing later, but for now it can move its way over there. While it's happily flying over there, I think it's a good time to kind of take a moment and talk about hardware. I have not played flight simulator games for, I'd say, give or take 10-15 years. And one of the things I flew with years and years ago is you just get, a cheap Thrustmaster stick, and it was good enough. The earliest flight simulator games, you were fine if you wanted to use keyboard and mouse. One of the things I've noticed is keyboard and mouse is, in my opinion, fairly unusable. It just does not work for this. What does work, if you're looking at the absolute easiest thing and like the lowest, cheapest piece of hardware that you could get that would work, I would say an Xbox controller. You have a little bit more control with the sticks, and it is very doable. We're going to go ahead and zoom out the map a little bit while we do that. Personally, I use essentially 3 pieces. I started with a Thrustmaster VelocityOne Flightstick. I really like it. It has 8 technically has like 12 or 16 programmable buttons, but there are 8 programmable buttons at the bottom that are easily accessible. They have nice feedback on them. I like everything about that. It also has 2 little levers that you can use to control things like your flaps or your speed, or to have a little more control over how you manage your airplane. I liked it by itself, and it did the job pretty well. I did end up also purchasing a Logitech, I think it's called Saitek. It's a company they probably bought out. They have a throttle control module, which I believe by itself is give or take $50. That I really liked, because you have a lot more control over your throttle. What it also has is another 8 programmable buttons. Are you starting to see a pattern? I love programmable buttons because I will put anything behind a button. And then the last thing that I do use is I have an Elgato streaming deck, just the smallest one, which has 8 buttons, which is, in my opinion, super useful. It allows me to map some of the controls that, in this case, right, you're looking at a tiny plane, all the buttons are right there, it's easy to understand. But when you go to larger planes, you might be looking at a control panel that is, 15 times the size of this. And it'll be a lot harder for you to find the exact button you're looking for, even though you use that same button in every aircraft all the time. So my solution to this was just simply bind some of these buttons to the Stream Deck, bind some of them to the throttle controls, bind some of them to the Flightstick, and that kind of worked really well, because now I have all of my usual buttons programmed away. Like, I have a button to turn on and off the taxi lights, for example. You can see the little switch here. That's just me pressing the button up and down. That's very useful if you're into that sort of thing. Now, while we're still heading in that direction, there are so many buttons that you can press inside of a cockpit. It's insane. I'm going to go ahead and turn that warning light off. And the cockpits themselves are really nice and detailed. Like, it is well done. You don't like your passenger, go ahead and open the window and let him enjoy a cold breeze. There are, I think, pretty much every plane you can turn things on and off. We have our throttle control, our mixture control, and parking brake, our trim, our flaps. Like, this is a very simple one. Also, some planes, as a heads up, you know, this one has fuel on both sides, right? Some of them will start with the fuel selector to one side, and you'll run out of fuel mid-flight and wonder to yourself, why on God's green earth did it stop? That's why. Then we can also take a closer look at this particular panel. These Garmin panels are super useful. Most planes will have them, and it makes flying a lot easier. In this case, you can kind of see my entire route. You can see where I'm at on the map. You can see where I'm going. The whole thing makes your life a lot easier, and it means that you won't have to constantly open up the EFB, because you can actually see where you're going. I think it's super useful. I think it's super helpful. There's a couple of other items that you can do while you're flying. One of them is use your radio. The / button opens your radio panel. Normally, the top one will be the nearest airport to you. 2 will just give you the whole list of what's around you, and that's quite a bit. You can look through the entire list, and you can connect to them as well. You can do flight following. They'll try to enforce the flight plan at that time, so I'm not going to do that, but it is something you could do. Now, I'm fairly certain that in the distance is Mount Fuji, and if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But we can go ahead and head that way. Let's set this for 14,000 feet. I'm not sure we're tall enough to actually get to the top of that, but we can find out. Let's go ahead and turn off the autopilot for a little bit, and we're just going to go ahead and help it climb. Now, the manual control is pretty easy in these things. I mean, especially in these smaller planes, you control the throttle, easy peasy. You can see that my airspeed is dropping as I'm trying to gain some altitude, and I will try to kind of keep it steady so that we can continue to gain altitude without losing too much airspeed. Oftentimes, if you try to climb or drop altitude while on autopilot, it won't always be as responsive. I have a feeling that if I turn on the autopilot now, it will probably be okay with climbing itself. Let's see if it does. And there you go. You can see now it's maintaining a steady climb, whereas earlier it was kind of just hanging out at the same altitude, which is not very helpful if we're trying to get up higher to avoid flying into a mountain. One thing you can see that it does here is you see the little sway side to side. That's not me, that is the autopilot. What I call this is, you know, it's like you're shaking your head side to side. It's a little bit weird. It does this on several planes. I think it's because it's getting to a low airspeed. I'm not a pilot, I don't know. But it is a little bit jarring. So we're going to go ahead and fly for a little bit and see if we can get closer to the mountain. One thing you'll start to notice as we get up is we are getting towards the clouds. I think most of the time the flight simulator really hits the mark and does a really good job of, you know, the way it displays the environment, sun, clouds, rain, thunderstorms, snow, all of that good stuff. I think it generally does a good job. But there are times where the clouds go from looking fluffy to looking boxy to looking like they're struggling to keep up with what it's supposed to look like. That can be disappointing. Looks like we're still pretty steadily climbing. Now you can see Tokyo in the distance behind us. You can see some of these bigger buildings. Those are really fleshed out. Buildings here, that are well fleshed out. And if you turn on the points of interest, you can see that, most of these buildings that are well done are because they're points of interest. As we go over here, you might be thinking to yourself, like, man, this is taking long. I want to get there faster. This game does allow you to increase the sim rate, which is basically the rate at which time transpires within the game. If I add +1, we go to this. Doesn't look much faster, but we are definitely moving faster. If I add another, now you definitely see a big difference, right? This can be helpful, especially if you're in career mode and you're on like a 5-hour cargo flight and you're like, I just want to get this over with. Get yourself up in the air at regular speed, just up the sim rate, because you get additional funds if you actually fly the mission instead of skipping legs. One of the downsides I've noticed to this is, again, we are moving so fast that it can struggle to keep up with basically streaming the environment. You'll get more stutter, you'll get uglier graphics, you get an uglier environment. It will struggle with that sometimes. Sim rate is limited. You can only add so much to it. I believe on my system at least, I've been able to add one more level, which is this, and then it's pretty much done. We are now solidly in the clouds. Hopefully no mountains show up. And you can kind of see, if you look at the graphics now, that the clouds look right there. There was a stutter where it struggled, and it's just not as pretty. Which is okay. It happens. It does make your life easier. Personally, I like it. I think it's a useful tool. In terms of where we are, I bet we went way off course, didn't we? Oh yeah, we went way off course. We should probably be turning a little bit this way. Turn it a little bit. You see it looks kind of funny too when you increase the sim rate. Let's take a look. There it is. And there's Mount Fuji. Now we'll get a little bit closer so we can get a better look at it, and then we'll land, and that will at least cover this part. Hopefully it kind of gives you an idea of what free flight is like. I'm thinking of adding follow-up videos where I can go a little bit further into things like career mode, flying with the helicopters, the activities that it offers. There are a lot of things that I think this game does really well. Not all of them. We're going to go ahead and reduce the sim rate before we just entirely overfly the place. And you can see our destination airport is right next to us as well. So after this, we can easily and quickly land there. But first, let's take a quick look at Mount Fuji and see what it looks like. I've reduced the sim rate back to its normal speed, and it might feel a little bit slow. We're going to go ahead and turn the engine down a little bit too, because we're going to drop some altitude as well. You can see the details on landmarks are pretty good. Look at that. You turn that on, it tells you it's Mount Fuji. We're only about, a mile and a half out, so nautical mile. As we get closer, you can see, for example, the detail on the paths going up, and we're going to just overfly the whole place before we turn back and head to the airport right down there. Is that Tokyo Center? I don't think so. That's Gotemba Airport. I may be mispronouncing that. We're going to go ahead and tune to that one. And you can see I can announce that I'm overflying the airport, which you sometimes will have to do, or I can select a runway for landing. In which case, while we try not to crash and use the tablet at the same time, we can pick a runway. And it will be O2, because we're coming from the right direction for that. I'm going to have to bring my attention back to where we're actually flying, because it looks like we're going to be crashing. There we go. Ooh, we are struggling to maintain our speed. Oh no, we're gonna definitely crash. Well, we didn't. I think this may be a little too much altitude for us here, because this thing has a fairly limited. We can try to go around it, but I think it's going to struggle to get up there. So we're going to have to do with heading to the airport. Now we did just pick airport or runway number 2 to land, so we're going to hit select runway. You get a list of the runways that are there. In this case it's O2, and in this case we're going to do a full stop landing. And you can see when we're rapidly dropping altitude, our speed goes up. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to drop that much altitude in such a short amount of time. I tend to just do it by kind of wiggling left and right to maximize how long it takes to get somewhere, and to try to keep that speed from not going into yellow or red. And you can see our altitude is dropping. We're going to have to go all the way back to the ground. The airport should be... It's a little bit behind us, about where those clouds are. So we might as well start kind of heading that way. And you can see on the map, I'm the white plane with the blue circle around it. The green line is the one I just set, which is a direct to... it just allows you to set a direct path to a destination. Sometimes it's helpful to skip certain waypoints if you want to. Oh, we are going way over speed. I sometimes use it as a tool to see how far the distance is to a particular waypoint that I want to get to, especially if I want to bypass certain waypoints. It tells me also at what number of degrees that direct to is, in case you need to maintain a heading towards it. In this case, I'm just using the engine itself, reducing throttle, and basically letting it tumble down to Earth. Probably not very safe, but hey, I'm not a pilot and nobody's paying me to do it. So we're just gonna do it this way. I think that's the airport in the distance there. That about lines up with what I'm seeing. Sometimes the draw distance can make it look like you're not that close, but we're pretty close to the airport. As you can see though, we still have quite a bit of altitude. Sometimes I'll just do little circles to get closer to the ground. In this case, I don't think it's going to require a whole lot. But we're going to go ahead and do that. Just one circle. We can be fancy and turn on our landing lights. That way everyone can see this flying object of doom coming towards them. You can see we're getting closer to the ground. You get a couple more ground textures here. The whole thing looks a little bit prettier. I know you're wondering if this thing will do a looping. It will not. I hate to disappoint. It will not. And now you can see we're kind of lined up already for runway 2. So we're going to go ahead and keep it going. I'm going to switch my throttle back on a little bit. Now this green line that you see here, by the speed, there's a white line. The white line is when you can use your flaps. So I need to get to a reasonably low speed to actually use my flaps and land somewhat safely.
Romeo Juliet Golf Oscar traffic. Dips 1-1 IT Kilo Hotel X-ray tree 1.
And I just like to zoom in the map just so. Ooh, it is at the wrong angle. You can tell the runway goes like this, so I need to be about there to at least come in straight onto that runway. And we are going way too fast, so this is going to be a fun landing. It'll be fine. These small airplanes, you can kind of just do whatever you feel like. It's not that big of a deal. You can crash. It's a mechanic you can also turn off if you're not interested in it. You can also automate your air traffic control so that your co-pilot does all the talking to them. I found that feature to not work super well, and I found that air traffic control is kind of irritating, as it always attempts to enforce the plan too strictly, and even if you turn that off, it just does not do a good job of it. Is that the runway? Am I that close? Yeah, it is. Alright, I don't think we're going to make that much of a descent and lose that much speed. So I'm going to go ahead and go around in a little circle and line this up a little better. Speed-wise, we're getting there, though. We lost most of our speed. We're going to go ahead and turn it around. Oh yeah, we're going nice and slow now. Going to go ahead and put the flaps down. And you can see I'm not straight. It's fine. We're still going to be able to land. I'm no expert, but I'm sure we won't crash. And if you're really heavily into... We're going to go ahead and... Ooh, we are going too slow. We're literally falling out of the sky. And while I was doing that, I gained way too much speed. Okay. Just gonna drop it on the floor here. It's fine. I'm sure we'll lose enough speed not to crash horribly. Alright, we're on the ground. I'm gonna go ahead and apply the brakes. Look at that. Nothing to worry about. Now, if you're heavily into the sim stuff, you can announce your taxi and all that good stuff. Something for newer players that I think people will like is you can turn on a path while the radio man talks. You will see these blue arrows. You can turn these on and off, but they will indicate the path to wherever you're supposed to park, right? So, in this case, it's a small airport. So we're just going to head over there. But on larger airports, this can be extremely helpful if you're not familiar with how it's all supposed to work. I'm going to do announce our taxi to parking. We're not even off the runway yet, but who cares? We're fast. I think we're supposed to also turn on our hoo-hoo taxi lights. Isn't that exciting? We're going to announce our taxi to parking.
Romeo Juliet Golf Oscar traffic. Dibs 1-1 IT Kilo Hotel X-ray tree 1 tree is taxiing to parking. Romeo Juliet Golf Oscar traffic.
And you can see it gives you a nice little route that you can take. You always get to park, at least in the smaller airplanes and airfields, you get to park where the guys in the yellow jackets are. So that's where we're going to go ahead and go. And you can see the textures here on the ground are a little janky. That truck looks like a literal box. That guy doesn't have any arms. It's just floating pylons. But we're going to go ahead and park it here and call it a day. There we go. Ooh, he got his arms back. Alright, so I just put on the parking brake. Control Shift E switches off the engine. You see how quiet it just got? And then using Shift C, you can get out, walk around, congratulate this man on having his arms back. Good job, buddy. And there we are. And that is the most basic review of how you fly in this game. I will probably add more at another time because I think there's a lot to cover in this game. But free flight this way, I think, is a lot of fun. It allows you to explore, it allows you to see places. And if you'd like to know more about it, by all means, drop a comment and ask questions that you want to ask. Thank you.